Buenos dias. We're here again at Automotive Logistics Mexico 2020. Chris Ludwigh, Editor-in-Chief, and Daniel Harrison, our Automotive analyst. We've been here this week talking about the supply chain here in Mexico, the developments of the market, production and exports, and we wanted to just spend a little bit of time talking with Daniel about his outlook on the market, what's influencing it, some of the regulatory sides which will impact it, and then a bit of an outlook on production. Daniel, let's start with the domestic market here in Mexico. It's been a bit of a downward trend of late. Are we in for some growth, do you think?
I think there'll be modest growth. We're looking at modest growth of around 2% CAGR over the next 5 years. I would say it's in two parts though. It's very much with passenger car demand is pretty much flat, whereas commercial vehicles is blossoming. But in total, those two combined, we're looking at about 2% growth. Quite modest, very similar in fact to the US market that's recovering again also from a downturn. So it's stable but steady growth at the moment.
And of course, if we look at some aspects of electric vehicles, for example, which currently represent quite a small share of the Mexican market, do you see that growing at all in the coming years?
Yes, but quite slowly, like the overall market size. What we're seeing is that the whole North American region have quite strong regulatory alignment in terms of emissions regulations. So the US CAFE standards, North America has pretty much aligned. So Canada and Mexico have largely agreed similar standards. But now that CAFE has been somewhat delayed or potentially even abandoned completely by the Trump administration, there's a situation where Mexico may or may not continue to align with that regulation or diverge from it and employ tougher regulations. And in fact, on the consumer side, they're starting to implement taxes and subsidies for electric vehicles. So yes, we do see growth there, but quite modest growth for EV penetration compared to markets like Europe or Asia.
And of course, I mean, the real topic here in Mexico naturally is the production and export side, which really is significantly bigger than the domestic market. What's your outlook right now for Mexican production export? We know the U.S. market has been relatively slow, perhaps even declining. That bound to have an export impact on the exports.
Absolutely. I mean, Mexico is fundamentally a net exporter of vehicles. I think their demand is around 1.4 million, whereas they export around 4 million. So it's very strongly a net exporter. And that production is growing very strongly. So we're seeing that gap between demand and production grow very, very much. And you're right, the vast majority of their production, I think around 75%, goes to the US market. So they're very much dependent on how the US market is doing. But we do see the US market recovering slightly at a similar sort of growth rate, around 2% CAGR.
And the prospects for electric vehicle production in Mexico. Now, the Ford Mach-E is one. There's also, I think, a niche Mexican brand. What's your outlook? Do you think more EV production could come to Mexico?
Yes, I think they could, but it's going to be problematic because, like the whole of the North America, as we said, the EV penetration is very low. So the whole supply chain is geared around internal combustion engines almost entirely. So the vast majority of batteries are still having to be imported, probably except for Tesla. So yes, we do see growth potential there, but getting the supply chains, in components for batteries, not just the raw materials as well, it's going to be very difficult to bring into the region and develop EVs in Mexico.
One of the interesting things that we learned about yesterday from resuscitate on of course the increasing local componentry. Of course, if the battery supply chain were not in North America, it would have a significant impact on the amount of local content that was there. So the prospects for battery production in Mexico, similar to what you said, or do you think there's some positive signs for that?
As far as I know, there's relatively few, mega factories in Mexico, so that's going to be a problem. So they're going to have to import that until that changes, that situation. So, but there is a huge potential to develop one here, and so yes, I think that whole supply chain, that new supply chain, has to be developed before we can see any significant EV growth in Mexico.
Daniel, thanks for your insights there. We're going to be continuing to monitor the situation. We have a report coming out on battery supply chain, as it were, and we'll continue to share our insights from Automotive Logistics Mexico ahead of making the videos online. Thanks very much. Gracias.